Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
I don't want to live, but I don't want to die. I don't know what to do. These were the words that left Matt Zerker's lips in front of his men's group for his first time ever verbalizing and fully coming clean about the reality of his inner struggle that he'd lone wolfed for so long on his own. That was also the day that he found a newfound sense of freedom, power, and clarity in his life. Because up until that point, Matt was extremely successful on paper, a high performer in every regard, from athletics to social standing to business, where he helped start a quantitative asset management firm grow from $0 under management to $350 million under management. But like so many men, much of that high performance lifestyle was driven from a deep sense of inadequacy versus from a conscious connection to his inner compass and guided by a higher purpose. Yet after the sudden death of a close friend and hitting his own personal bottom, Matt began his painful journey to find his center, which eluded him for a number of years as he sought help lone wolfing on his own. He would only find that center once he found a community of men where he could reveal the reality of his inner struggle, not wanting to live, but not wanting to die and having no idea what to do next. So today, Matt is the founder and CEO of Tethr, which is an app-based community and well-being platform for men, which specifically focuses on supporting men with anxiety and depression. Tethr has been featured in the New York Times and Healthline, and I personally find it to be an intriguing platform, which I've already downloaded as an app on my iPhone, where men around the world are finding and supporting one another in the most challenging of times. So in this episode, you're going to hear about how to know when your drive for high performance is really rooted in fear and feelings of inadequacy versus alignment with your higher purpose. Matt talks about how our competitive environments with men keep us in constant comparison with other men, judging them, pedestaling them, subordinating them, all while allowing the chasm between us and other men to deepen and making connection impossible. He makes a case for allowing your current identity to die, right? This limited identity of who you think you are that's attached to your job, to your title, to the money you're making, to your relationship, so that a deeper, stronger, and freer part of you can emerge. And then we also talk about how the most painful part of your journey cannot be circumvented as much as you want it to end, how that painful part of your journey is something that can be viewed as an essential part of your growth trajectory. I think you're really going to love this conversation, guys, because I was riveted by how open Matt was about the realities of his inner struggle. And he has this great narrative and a storytelling ability that really weaves some of the deeper points around this inner work journey. And he even went so far as to share stories in this conversation that he's never spoken about publicly in other forums. So we get the gift of that as well. And once you have a chance to hear and see Matt behind the scenes, I think you're really going to be compelled to want to take a look at downloading the Tethr app so you can start to see the other men around the world who are coming to this forum to find connection, to support one another when we're going through the anxious or depressive moments in our lives, and also to be of service and to receive that service as well. So enjoy today's conversation with Matt Zerker, the founder of Tethr, the men's mental health company. Matt, buddy, you are the founder and CEO of Tethr, which is a peer-enabled mental health and well-being platform for men. What is it? How did it come to be? And welcome to the show, brother.
Well, thank you for having me, Dominic. I'm really excited to be here. I've really enjoyed our chat just now. This is going to be a lot of fun. So Tethr, as you mentioned, it's a peer-enabled, mental health and well-being platform for men. And we like to focus on emotional fitness because one of the big things that we've realized in our almost 2 years of building Tethr is that men will take care of their physical fitness, but then there's a component of mental emotional fitness that is so essential to quality of life, integration, performance, all of these things. And men aren't taking care of that. And where the platform came from was obviously, my own origin with all of this. And I'm going to go back to 2018. Listen, I grew up in Toronto. I grew up with a really good family. I never wanted for anything. But one of the things that happened to me at a very young age that very much shaped who I was and how I was going to be in the world was that I was bullied pretty much constantly from the time I was in grade 2 till the time I was in grade 6. And I don't really remember ever having good friends until high school. And so as a result, I just sort of always felt perpetually alone in the world. And my parents are, great people, work hard. They grew up in a different generation. And I don't think they really understood how to relate to me emotionally. And no fault of their own. I know that they tried, but there was always kind of this frustration. And as a kid, when you're being met with frustration around your emotions, what you're struggling with, you start to internalize that there's something wrong with you. And you can't see that it's actually they're frustrated because they don't feel like they can help you. And so all of this inadvertently compounded. It's I had this complex, this inferiority complex that I somehow wasn't enough, right? That I needed to perform. I needed to be better. I needed to be funny. I needed to get good marks in school, all of those kinds of things in order to be lovable, really, which I think is kind of what we're all looking for at our core is to feel like we're worthy and enough and lovable on some level. And the way that manifested for me was, undiagnosed eating disorder in my teens. When I was in, high school, definitely liked to party, definitely liked to mix it up. But what I was really looking for was that connection.
What does an undiagnosed eating disorder for a man, look like?
Yeah, I would eat as much as I possibly could. I was definitely a chubbier kid, and I would eat to the point where I was so full that I was sick. And the only way that I could relieve that was actually, making myself throw up in a lot of cases. It was this binge and purge thing. And it was always kind of hidden, never really talked about it with my folks, never got any help or support for that. It was a way of filling myself up because I felt so empty. And it's very much symbolic of how empty I felt as a kid from the love. And food was that way of actually quelling that. Then it became, drugs and alcohol in high school and the early stages of university. And then when I realized that wasn't working for me anymore, I thought I would just throw myself into performance. And so I ended up graduating top of my class from university, got a graduation award for standing first in my class. I did my chartered financial analyst designation while I was an undergrad. I would push myself 12, 14 hours a day to make sure that I was always performing. Got a job in finance because I thought if I have a suit, if I have a car, if I have a nice home, that's going to fix all of these problems that I have within me. Ended up joining a quantitative asset management firm here in Toronto, had my CFA, helped grow that firm from $0 in assets to $350 million in assets under management in just a couple of years, became a portfolio manager, was on track to becoming a partner in this firm. And so from the outside, it all looked great. All of this performance was coming from a deep place of inadequacy and from a deep place of needing some kind of external validation in my life. And when everything really crashed down around me was in 2018. So I owned my own home at this point. I was living in a townhouse complex. And I lived in this townhouse complex, and the way that it was set up, it was two buildings kind of face to face. And there was a little laneway that went between them. And there was these two balconies, right? My balcony was a Juliet balcony coming out from, not a Juliet, a regular sized balcony coming out from my living room. And then there was another one across the way. And one night I'm out there having a beer, and there's another guy across the way from me, and he's having a beer. This is around 2015. And we just start talking to him. And the first words I'll remember that he said to me was, "Hey man, who the fuck are you?" And that was how we started.
Typical guy greeting.
Yeah, who the fuck are you? And that was how we started the conversation. And that guy very quickly became one of my very close friends. And, we'd have these balcony chats. We both worked downtown in Toronto, so we would take the train down to work together. That night, there was a Raptors game. They didn't have cable yet, and they didn't have a TV. So I invited them over. We had beers, watched basketball. And that was kind of how that relationship started. And in 2018, one day, he had a pulmonary embolism and dropped dead, and that was it. And his life ended. He dropped dead right on the front steps of his apartment. And there was something in me that just changed in that moment. I don't think I realized any of this, right? This is all me talking from hindsight and having done a tremendous amount of my own work, but something really shifted. And I knew that I was sort of deeply unhappy on some level, like I was coming back from work, numbing out at the end of the day, whether that was with a few beers or watching TV or eating or whatever that was, dating, sex, all of that kind of stuff, using it to actually avoid the fact that there was something wrong with me, not wrong with me, but that there was something wrong in me that I needed to actually address and confront. And that really sent me off the edge. I ended up going on mental health leave from work because I was just experiencing crippling existential anxiety, suicidal depression. I couldn't move. I couldn't work. I couldn't focus, nothing. And then I started my journey, and I was going to therapists and trying medication and experimental treatments and, a whole bunch of other things that like would be an entirely other episode in terms of like the things that I tried, and nothing was really making a difference for me. And then one day, a friend of mine said, you know what, man, I'm actually going to go join this men's group here in Toronto. I think it might be helpful for you. Do you want to join? And I was like, sure, fuck it. I mean, I've tried everything else at this point. Might as well.
And those other things that you tried, would you say that you'd put most of those in the category of you were kind of a lone wolf in doing that? Meaning like you were not part of a group of men. It was, I'm going to get therapy. I'm doing my ayahuasca experience. And it's like you're around other people, but it's really kind of just like you doing it.
I think that's a really, really great like interjection and like little point about it is, and I think, why Tethr is so effective, right? Because when you do therapy, like all of those things were necessary and have helped me in some way, shape, or form. The medication got me a little bit out of it. So I wasn't in crisis and I could actually start confronting some of this stuff. The therapy allowed me to process a lot of the stuff that I went through as a child and the loneliness that I felt, going through my childhood and, stuff about my relationship with my parents, all of that. But there was something that was kind of missing. And in that first meeting, like, as you pointed out, there was this connection. It was the first time in my life that I was ever able to say to a group of men, I don't want to live anymore, but I don't want to die. And I have no idea what to do.
Can you just hang on a second, man? I got chills down my spine when you said that. Like, I'm just picturing you being in front of a group of guys for the first time and voicing this thing that had been inside of you for so long. I don't want to live. I don't want to die. I don't know what to do. And as men, we're not allowed to not know what to do in most places. When you said that inside of this group of men where you truly just said, I fucking don't know what to do, how were you met?
And this was the turning point, right? And it was the first time that was ever met with not, well, maybe you should go to the gym or try veganism or, do some ice baths or, I hear breathing and meditation is really fucking helpful for people that are like as hopeless as you. But it was the first time they were able to say, yeah, I get it. And we love you. And we're here for you. Like, I'm getting the goosebumps just saying that because I think it was the first time that I'd ever experienced another man holding space for me in a real way, in a meaningful way, in a, I know exactly what you're feeling type of way. I didn't know it at the time. I walked out of there. I still woke up the next day with crippling anxiety. I still woke up the next day being like, I don't know what to do with my life. I don't want to go on. I can't figure this out. But something small shifted in me. And so what then ended up happening, it was like I continued to go back every 2 weeks, kept going back, building deeper relationships with these men. And in fact, that was 2018. I sat with them on Monday, same group of 5 guys. It's been 3 years. And we still sit together every single 2 weeks. The moment of like, I don't want to even call it the real shift because this has happened throughout this whole process. But the real moment of like, okay, I'm going all in was I went on a men's retreat down in the US in April 2019.
Which men's retreat you go on?
Every Man. Yeah. So
yeah, they're great.
Dan, when he was still with Every Man, he was there. Owen Marcus led me through a hero's journey. Lucas was there. Sasha was there. The whole crew was there. And they were still, very much like, obviously this is all pre-COVID and they were kind of like hitting their stride with the whole retreat format. And I went to that retreat and I went down with one of the guys from my men's group. And the whole way down, I'm just like a total mess, right? I'm like, panicked. I'm like, what the fuck is going to happen when we go there? There was something in me that was like, that knew that something profound was about to happen going down there. And my whole being was like, please don't make me go through this. Right?
Yep. That's when you know.
Yeah.
That's when you know that's the thing you're supposed to go through.
Exactly. And then 2 years later, building a company, I know exactly why it didn't want me to go through that. So I go on this men's retreat and I have this really profound experience. One of the days actually being led through a healing journey, a hero's journey, whatever you want to call it. It's a somatic experiencing exercise where you go really, really deep into something. And that was led by Owen Marcus, who I'm forever grateful for picking me that day, because there was like 70 guys and a bunch of us stood up, closed our eyes and said, like, I want to do it. And he picked me for whatever reason, but it's like, I really wanted to like get in there. So I feel like that resonated. And so I went on this. And I had been waking up with panic attacks every single day for 10 or 11, 12 months at this point. Like every day, open my eyes, panic attack. There was no break, right? It was like I woke up into it every single day. The morning after that experience was the first day I woke up and was able to like notice the sheets on my body, the sun coming in through the window, to be able to lie in my bed with some semblance of peace. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? Because it was so different in terms of feeling from everything that I had experienced for the last year and a half. Something had shifted. Anyways, I did exactly what they tell you not to do after having one of these experiences, which is go home and make a big life decision.
All the changes, yeah.
Exactly. It's like, you're going to want to let this settle. And I'm like, nope, I'm not going to let any of this settle. I'm making all of the decisions right now. So I got back on a Monday. I quit my job 2 days later. And I just was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no backup plan with any of this, but I'm going to go off and figure this out. And it was like, I would say 4, 5, 6 months later that I actually started Tethr. So, and starting it also from a place of like, in a lot of ways, like real brokenness, right? So there's so much that got infused with my experience building a company in the early days, where it was like, I didn't want all of that pain that I had experienced to be for nothing. I didn't want it to be in vain. And so I threw a lot of that pain, admittedly, into the building of the company in the early days. And that's something like I can totally go off and we can kind of, get to that like building of companies and how this sort of related to my own journey with masculinity. But that was sort of the jumping off point for me. And then as happens when you start to live in greater alignment, I wouldn't even say perfect alignment because I don't even know what the fuck that means. But as you start to live in greater alignment with your values, with your purpose, with your meaning, doing things that actually, I think, challenge you in some way, shape, or form, stuff started to fall into place for me. And I started to have the experiences that I didn't necessarily want to have or that were comfortable, but that I needed to have to get to the place where I am today. And again, I say this all in hindsight.
Incredibly powerful story, man. And there's like 30 different places I can jump in. Mm-hmm. But I think one place that is really potent, especially for our listeners, is how you talked about this performance, which was rooted in deep inadequacy, right? And how so many of us choose to become a high performer because there's something inside that's either a self-worth issue or a fear of being passed by or a fear of not, I know one of my things is like a fear of not being special, because I kind of grew up with a lot of feelings of, oh, I'm special. And then when those things went away, when other people rose above me, there was like this, well, I gotta get the attention back. You can start to build your entire life around performance. And there's an ambivalence that starts to arise from that where you can certainly experience benefits from that. Maybe financial stability, maybe social circles, maybe you get to live where you want to live, maybe you make the kind of money where you don't have to want for anything, but it's all tethered to, it's a compulsion, it's drift. It's not necessarily a place of conscious, I'm choosing all of it. So if you're speaking maybe to a man who's in that place right now, or maybe to yourself before 2018, what would you want that version of you to know that you know now about the way you were living your life at that point in time?
Oh, that's a great question. I've actually never been asked that. And I like how you use the term tethered to something. Thank you very much for throwing that subtle hook in there. So about the way that I was living then is that what I would say is like, this is necessary. Everything that you're experiencing that is painful, that is not what you want, is what you need to experience in order to find out what you do truly want. from where I am right now, I would not have spared that person any of the pain or anguish that he went through, because in so many ways, and I can only say this in hindsight, is that pain has been my greatest teacher through that process. Even though every moment of it, I wanted it to end and I wanted it to go away and I didn't want to feel this anymore. Even like, man, I've had moments in the last few weeks where I'm like, can we please just like be done with how uncomfortable this all is? Now I have some of the tools and I'm still building tools. And that's kind of like the next edge for me is practices, tools and things like that really allow myself to ground and drop into the energy and frequency that I want for myself on a daily basis. But I now have the tools to be able to be aware of when I feel like I'm suffering and know that that is my cue to actually slow down, to drop out of my head, to drop into my body, to try and detach from the narrative in some way, shape, or form and feel into it. And the place that I usually get to from doing that exercise is, at least most of the time, what I know that I'm experiencing is that there's this feeling of unworthiness. There's this feeling of not enoughness. There's this feeling of lack within me. And so what I have to do is I have to be able to be with that child that didn't feel like he was enough in that moment. And I have to spend time with him. And sometimes he doesn't want to kind of hear it from me. Sometimes he knows that I'm being disingenuous and going through the motions. Sometimes he knows, he's like, I know your trick. Like you're trying to make me feel comfortable so that I'll shut up and go be in the corner. And I'm not fucking buying it today.
Right. It's like patronizing a child, right? Like a child knows when you're there for the child or you're just patronizing it.
Exactly. Right. And so some days it works better than others. Some days I'm more genuine and authentic. Some days I really do want to be with that version of me, that younger version of me. But I know that that's my cue, that I do need to spend some time with myself. I need to drop out of the head. I need to drop out of problem solving mode. Because when we get into that, it's like, what do I need to acquire, do? What do I need to fix in order to get rid of this feeling, to feel like I'm enough? And the trick is, right, and it's the greatest trick that the devil ever pulled, right? The trick is that you're already enough. And it's just coming back to that knowing. There is nothing to do except to be still, except to be with yourself in that moment. And it's the hardest thing for men to do because we're taught to problem solve. We're taught to push forward. We're taught to figure things out. We're taught to do. And so I think the biggest thing, and this is like, now I'm going to go like on like more of like an energetic thing, is like, this is where the balancing of the masculine and the feminine comes in, right? This is where integration comes in. Being able to do is a very necessary good thing. Like it's very much like the warrior archetype of masculine psychology. But then we also have to be able to hold space for ourselves. And that is the integration of the feminine. And that is also the benevolent king. The benevolent king, the one that can, that can offer grace, that can offer compassion. It's like the wise grandfather. It's not your father, it's the wise grandfather who's seen it all, been through some shit, and just knows that you need a bit of comfort in that moment and somebody to be there with you. And that's the polarity. Learning how to play with that is so interesting and so fulfilling. And I wouldn't have gotten to that place. And this is something that I continue to deepen into. Like I feel like I'm just starting this part of the journey, but I think it's the deepening into that is really the edge that then unlocks so much more in terms of performance, in terms of being able to do, because you've actually been with that part of you that feels abandoned. And once that part of you like feels seen, acknowledged, held, all of that type of stuff, then it can just like take that breath. Like we breathed before this, you can just take that breath. The nervous system starts to settle down a little bit, right? You can have that moment and you're like, okay, I'm okay. What do I need to do next? And it's not, what do I need to do next? It's, okay, what do I need to do next? And it comes from that place of grounding.
Everything you're talking about is something that men cannot get to on their own, right? Like
No.
you cannot figure this stuff out on your own. And I think back to these pivotal parts of your journey that has now allowed you to hold space for yourself. And the first one was stepping into that men's group. I don't want to live. I don't know what I don't know what the fuck I want to do. And then these guys are not telling you, they're not prescribing veganism or breath work or anything. Just like holding that And then, maybe a year later, it was going to your first everyman retreat where a skilled practitioner, like an Owen Marcus and the other guys who were holding that space, brought you through that hero's journey, where you were also buffered and supported by the 70 other men who were looking on and holding that space for you, right? Like, you can't discount that.
And that's a whole other part of the story, is like going through that and then seeing 70 guys like
witnessing
you. And exactly, like that shit is like, anyway.
That's terrifying to a lot of men who are listening who have never experienced that before. And I know when I walked into my first 12-step Sex Addicts Anonymous meeting back in 2013, I've shared this on the show a number of times that, for my whole life, I'd walked into groups of men, and my first, like, the algorithm that just kicks into gear is like, okay, who's my competition? Where's the alpha dog? Where's the person I know I can dominate? Who's my threat? You're just like, It wasn't even a thing I consciously did. It was just every time I walked into groups of guys, it was competitive. And that was the first time I was ever in a group of guys who were there to support me. And it scrambled my fucking brain because I was still running the old, and I'm sitting there judging everybody. And it took me 3 months and my sponsor whacking me over the head to be like, dude, you're holding yourself separate. These guys are here to support and connect with you, not to compete with you. And if a man has never been in an environment like that, he has no concept of what he's missing out on. There's no point of reference. And so, like, I'd love to just walk back to that morning where you wake up. I know that feeling where the alarm goes off or the sun rises and like you come into that first bit of consciousness and all of a sudden it's like, shit, like all the to-dos before you even remember who the fuck you are. It's like, bang, this thing is, it's now swallowed you. You're enveloped in it. And even with awareness, like, and I have a pretty deep awareness practice, even when I'm aware of it, like I'm still swallowed by it. And I have to work really hard sometimes to like, but when you woke up that morning and you could feel the comfort of your bed and the coziness of it, what then started to come alive inside of you?
That's a great question. I don't even think I was aware enough at that moment to actually know what was coming online. It was in so many ways this connection to a different way of being, right? An ability to be present, an ability to not be in this constant state of, like you say, comparison, right? Because that competition piece is just about comparison. That was my safety mechanism, right? It's like, how am I doing compared to all of these people to know whether I'm okay or not, right? Like I need you as a point of reference in order to know if I'm okay.
Where does that come from, Matt? Where do you think that comes from? Like, because I had the same thing.
Well, I mean, I think for men, it's like, listen, we're just taught to compete our entire lives. At least for me, it was hockey, it was baseball, it was grades, right? Like, we're always pitted against each other in some way, shape, or form. The way media works, movies, right? The story of heroes in movies, right? Which is like, if you look at the narrative arc of most, male protagonists in a movie, it is man, goes on journey, man faces obstacle, man overcomes obstacle through sheer force of will and depth of character. But then there's always like the Yoda type figure, right? That it's like, that's the person that's actually responsible for the success, but we just don't give that person any kind of credit in the movie, or at least our brains connect together that was the reason. Like it was just something internal that person had that was different from everyone else that made them a hero. And nobody gives credit to that, whatever, it's the spiritual teacher, it's the wise yogi, it's like
it's Morpheus, it's Lieutenant Dan,
it's Blue, right? Like it's all these characters that brought that online, right, in that moment. And this is what I think has really happened to me, and it kind of goes back to, I've actually never said this on like a podcast, but like, what the hell? I had done like a heroic dose of mushrooms, and I was doing like the whole blindfold thing and the music thing and whatever. And I was in this like cave, essentially. And I knew that the cave was actually me. So I was like within me. And there was this orb, this bright light. I've never told this to anyone. So like, this is like, you're bringing something out of me here. But there was like this orb and this bright light. And I walked up to that orb and that bright light. And I stood there for a minute. And I think I was wearing that Jungle Boat outfit where it's like, I look like I'm going up like the River Delta or something like that. There was like cargo pants and like khaki. I remember there being a lot of khaki. involved in this. But I go up to this orb and it's bright and it's white and it's emanating this vibration, this energy, whatever. And the sense that I have is that this thing is very precious, right? There's something there that's very precious, that's very special. And I sit there for a moment and I observe this and I think I put my hand up to it for a moment. And then there's this part of me that goes, okay, I'm just going to leave this here for now and come back to it. And then I walk away. It wasn't until years later, actually, when I had actually connected, and this ties back to me waking up.
Actual years?
No.
Okay, so you're not in the journey anymore.
No. Not okay. Like, this is like, I've come out, I've processed some stuff. Oh, that was really cool. I saw all this shit, right? Going from like completely unawakened to like splitting something open, which is like, I think there's a huge amount of value with entheogens and plant medicines and all of this type of stuff. People think of it as more of a silver bullet than it actually is, because what it's actually doing is it's cracking you open. And so many of my lessons from those journeys, and then the arc of all the journeys that I've done, which I could go into and speak more about, but it unveils itself over time as you become ready for that. And so going back to being in the bed that morning and how this thread ties back was, I think that like what I know today was that orb was actually this inner authority. We can call it inner authority. We can call it self-trust. We can call it God, right? You can call it that connection to that. There's so many things, but it is that ability to trust in oneself. And when there is an ability to trust in oneself, and I think I'm only starting to come online with this, so this conversation is very appropriate for where I am right now in my journey. But going back to what you were saying about, walking into the bar and being like, who's my threat? Who do I have to out alpha? All that kind of stuff. And then the bed, right? It's like when you are deeply connected to that inner authority, you don't need to compare anymore. You don't need to compete anymore. It's not ego. It's not this sense of being better than anyone. It's just a deep sense of trust in yourself. And it's like that need to compare as a safety mechanism starts to really dissolve. And so I think that is the journey for men in this space and in this work, is connecting deeper and deeper and deeper to that inner authority, right? And now we can start to get into like masculine archetypes and all that kind of stuff, but it's actually connecting to that and then learning to play with it and learning to develop a relationship with it. That I think is really the journey that we're kind of all on, or at least that I would push men from my own experience down that road, because that's where I think genuine confidence comes from. That's where I think genuine self-trust, self-acceptance, self-love comes from being able to actually connect to that inner authority that we all have within us, except it's just socialized and beaten and traumatized out of us by society, movies, things that happen to us. And so all of us, I think that's returning home. And that's that famous Ram Dass quote of we're all just walking each other home. Right?
Yes.
That's my favorite. It's like, I think we're all just walking each other back to that place.
I'm going to add one more thing to that laundry list of benefits of finding that inner authority, which is freedom. Mm-hmm. Every man that I speak to, like one of the highest values is feeling a sense of freedom, mm-hmm. authority over one's life. And yet we think that freedom exists in running our own business or freedom to travel, what we really want freedom from is that inner turmoil, mm-hmm. like that freedom from I'm not enough, that freedom from comparing ourselves to one another. Because when you're comparing yourself, like I'm, competing with this guy and that's telling me how well I'm doing, there's no freedom in that because there's no stability. There's no groundedness. Like what I'm hearing from you is when you found that home, you had that wake up the next morning, the freedom from all the turmoil, the chaos, the shit. You stopped judging others. You stopped criticizing others because quite frankly, it doesn't matter. Like you let someone else live their life and then you get to live your life and there's that confidence. I want to say a few things here, man. First of all, thank you for sharing, Matt, that story with us, because I know you said you haven't shared it with anyone on a podcast before. So I feel honored.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a beautiful story. One of the things that I think this leads to is, and you started this conversation before we were recording, is, as men, when we talk about our identities, mm-hmm. our self-concept, right? Like who we believe ourselves to be, a lot of times that is wrapped up in the work that we do. And before I kick this ball over to you, one of the things that I learned from James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits, is if you break down the root of the word identity, there's two Latin words that I can't quite remember, but what it translates to is repeated state of beingness. Your identity is your repeated state of beingness. And when you actually dive into that, It means that how you are being over an extended period of time creates your identity, your self-concept. Mm-hmm. And when you take a closer look at that, your identity is really rooted in who you were in the past versus a conscious creation of who you are becoming in the future.
Yeah.
It like repeats it at beingness is like what you've already done, who you've already been. And a lot of your behaviors leading up to this point have not been conscious, right? They've been drift, right? Like, autopilot. So let's talk about this performance-based concept. And now, we're up to this point where you did the opposite of the advice that you were given after your everyman retreat. You came back, you were awakened. You decided to leave this quantitative asset firm that you helped to grow from 0 to 350 million in a period of a few years. And you're like, I'm out of there. And then you start Tethr. Let's talk about now, like some of the beautiful gifts that you brought into the foundation of that business, but you also said the pain that you brought in. And if you can also, I know I'm asking a really complicated question.
Oh no, I'm tracking all this, man. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I'm with you. I've already answered the question in my own head.
Good. I'll stop talking then. Just go ahead.
Yeah, no. I think it's like what you said. It's like, it's really interesting because there's that saying, it's like, we are what we repeatedly do. And I think that's kind of at the core of that. I was actually, shout out to Tom Bilyeu. I've loved his stuff for a long time. I think what he's doing is great. He did this post, I think it was like 3 weeks ago, and it really stuck with me and it's kind of been percolating in my head. But he said, like, if you don't have a plan for who you want to be in 5 years, the person that you will be in 5 years is the person that you are now. And I think like he talks it very much about habits and plan and all of that kind of stuff. I come at it more from like a conscious awakening perspective. Right? It's like you cannot change what you are not aware of. And I think this is really interesting about where the whole self-help, manifestation, all of this kind of stuff is, where it's like, well, if I just think positive thoughts all the time, then I will bring all of these things into my life. But what you're missing is the fact that you have all of these computer scripts that are running in the background that are related to trauma, that are related to the way they process information, and are all related to actually facing grief, shame, sadness, darkness, all of these things, becoming consciously aware of like, holy shit, I do that because of blank. And until you actually confront that, work through it, it's just like, until you have like a profoundly deep, almost painful awareness in some cases of that thing that you do that sabotages you. I mean, I know you mentioned, Sex Anonymous and all of that, like, how we relate to women and how we use that as a method of validation as well, until you realize, oh my God, I'm doing that. And then be like, wait a minute, but if I don't do that to get validation, who the fuck am I? And that's the terrifying thing that people, and I think the reason why people stay so stuck in their patterns. And so this comes back to your point about, well, what did you bring into this? And then, kind of what did you learn? And it was that I did probably 90% of the things that I did in my life were for validation and for acceptance and for love. And it's kind of like, people say, oh, well, that's such a shitty thing that you did. And it's like, well, no, yes, it was like, I did some shitty stuff. And like, I did some things that, I'm definitely not proud of. But at the same time, I did that because there was like this really wounded little boy that felt completely unlovable and just needed some attention and love. And so once I realized that, then I was like, oh, holy fuck, like, what do I do with all that? Right? And who am I now? And that's where there's like this void that then needs to be filled in with a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's when you can actually you can start doing that whole repatterning thing, right? Because formation of habit is not going to happen unless you actually have a painful awareness of what you do and why you do it and why that's a protective mechanism for you. So that's the first step. And that's the most painful step. But once you're beyond that step, shit starts to become interesting, I think. And so where I got to was like, and this took me probably at least a year and a half of running Tethr. And there was something that happened and we had like this problem, this like, this slight blow up that happened with something that was going on in our app. And it just felt like one of those things that I was never going to be able to fix, never be able to surmount. Whatever. And it's like my entire body just shut down in that moment. My story when I started Tethr was I ended up selling my house. I moved into a basement apartment. We started in November. COVID hits in March. We launched the app in June. I actually got COVID, so I was alone for 21 days. And that was like the best thing that ever happened to me. First of all, I'm very grateful that I don't have any long hauler symptoms. I lost some taste and smell, and people have had like a lot of really horrible in life. In some cases, it's cost people's lifetime. So I don't want to make light of this, but for me, having to be alone for 21 days really forced me to confront a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't want to do. And so I see it now as a blessing. At the moment, I was terrified that I was going to have to go on a ventilator, that I'd given it to people in my family and friends because I had seen people like a couple days before. And anyways, it was not the best experience, but now looking back is like, I was forced to be with myself. And then when that thing happened, the compounding of starting a business purely from a place of needing and craving validation, being like, please don't make this pain and suffering that I've had be worth nothing. And, infusing a lot of that into the business. And what that creates is a tension within you, a tightness. And it's like, well, this can't fail. I can't possibly let this fail, because if it fails, then I'm worth nothing.
Let's pause on that, because that's a really important point. Is if we look at that from a traditional societal perspective, it's look how committed to the cause you are. There's perseverance. I can't let this fail. But what you're saying is, let's look at the energy behind it. The energy behind it is, it's not that I can't let this fail because I believe so much in the mission. Mm-hmm. Like the energy there is, I can't let this fail because what would that mean about me?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's both. It's actually both.
Both. Okay.
It's a duality. I think this is also where a lot of people get tripped up. It's like, well, if it's one thing, it can't be the other. Well, it can actually be both. It was an utter, complete commitment to the cause and an utter belief in what I was doing. And it was, if this fails, then what does this mean about me? Right? It was both of those things together, which I also think made it a lot more painful, but also so much more valuable as a learning experience. And so my body basically shuts down. I was probably in bed for about a week, right? Like I slept for a week. I wasn't depressed or anxious. I was like, man, I'm worn down. And it was from holding that tightness in me for such a long time. It was the first time I had ever let into my mind that this may not work out, that this may fail. It was crushing to my identity. It was the one thing that my brain, my consciousness, my subconscious did not want to look at. And it was the thing that I had to look at. And so once I started to look at that and play with it, and I don't know why I did, this is something I did kind of completely like on my own, but it was like, and I would bounce it off guys in my group and stuff like that. But a lot of this work was done by myself. And I got to this place of like, what does this mean for me? Who am I if this doesn't exist? And I had to ask that question. I could not look at that question anymore. And it was like, oh my God. And there was this knot in my stomach. And like, I felt like I wanted to throw up. My body was vibrating, because what it actually was the fear of my own death. The fear of Tethr's death was actually just a proxy for my fear of death. And I've experienced this in, psychedelics, ayahuasca and stuff like that. It's like that moment right before you actually give up. That's the most painful. You just don't want to let go. You don't want to let go because you don't know what's going to happen if you let go or take the dive or jump off the cliff, whatever metaphor you want to use for that. And there was like this release. And I realized that I was going to be okay. My life wasn't going to be that story that I had created, but I was going to be okay. I was going to survive. And actually, my experience started to loosen up. And then I got up the next morning and my to-do list actually didn't seem as daunting. When something went wrong with, whether it was development or community or something, I didn't feel as panicked by that. I started to actually learn how to operate in the face of uncertainty, fuck-ups, failure, all of that stuff that I think is really, part and parcel of the zen of building a startup, building a company. And even today, by no means is my success guaranteed, but I'm okay with that on some level. And like, if there's something that I want to communicate to men specifically, right? It's like allowing that thing to actually die in your mind, which again is just a proxy for actually confronting your own mortality and your own finite existence. But like allowing that thing to die and knowing that you will be okay regardless, that you are, because really it's like, I don't know if I will be enough after this thing happens, if this thing happens, and I don't want to face that. But if you can cross that bridge and you can face the void, again, I'm using a lot of like, I feel like this is like a very Joseph Campbell type thing that's going on right now. But like, if you can cross the bridge and face the void, and jump into it and then know what it's like to actually land and be like, I'm still here. My body is still here. My beingness is still here. I'm okay. I think that a lot of fear dissipates in that moment. And so much of us just live completely consumed by fear.
Completely consumed. I'm just thinking about some of the men in our community who over this last year, let's say a marriage ended because his wife was cheating on him.
Mm-hmm.
And, like the identity death of I'm a husband, this is our family. And now like all of a sudden I'm a single guy in my mid 40s. And what happens? Another man who was the CEO of a startup company for 7 years, and then he was ousted by the board of directors. I was a CEO. Who am I now? And then I think about my own personal journey of I'm this leader with an impeccable resume. But then when I got exposed for Sex Addicts Anonymous, it's like all of a sudden, maybe I'm not so impeccable. And then who am I if I'm not that guy who's always in integrity and alignment? And then, leaving a corporate environment and I'm no longer the VP of this one company. Like these things that we are attached to, right? The success, our identities, et cetera, are the antithesis of freedom, right? Because we are clinging to that. And when you talk about your experience with Tethr and having to go through that process of, wow, I have to play this whole thing out, this thing that I'm not willing to face. What if this thing fails? And then all the energy and the effort and the pain that I put into this, is it all for nothing? And who am I? When you had a chance to face that, then you realized I can survive this. I'll be good. Mm-hmm. And then you came back, and the energy that you bring to the business now is like you talked about the duality before, where it was like, I believe in the mission, but I also have this like fear of inadequacy driving me. When you remove the inadequacy part of things, then it's just I believe in the mission. And that is so much cleaner. The vision is so much more precise. And for you and for any of the men who are listening here, like just think about how that applies to your life and how you show up in your business or in your relationships. Like what if you were to dissolve the funky part of that duality in your life, and like how much cleaner and more powerful would you show up?
If I could sum that up in 3 words, it's like, let it die.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, that's the thing that you don't want to look at. And I think so many men who are in relationships that aren't working stay in them because they can't face who they would be outside of it. But also thank that part of you, because really that's just the ego structure trying to protect you from death, right? That's what the ego does. It tries to keep us safe. It's like, oh shit, there's a mountain lion around the corner. I should probably not go in that direction. But when it comes to this stuff, it actually upends us and it de-empowers us, because then we start to make decisions from fear. And people are like, why do I keep repeating the same things? Why do I keep having these toxic patterns in my life? Well, it's because you're living from fear, right? And really the fear is that like, I'm going to be, and like, I don't have all the answers to this shit. Like I'm just starting to really pull back the layers of this stuff and kind of learn it. But like I feel like I'm closer to that, like to that authenticity than I've ever been in my life. Do I have fear? Fuck yeah. I woke up my bed's not fucking made. Like I woke up this morning, I was like, I got to get this thing that, you know what I mean? Like that was like, and I was like, I just got to get a coffee. Like I walk outside, it's like, oh shit, I forgot my pants, right? Like go back, put your pants on before you get the coffee. Like none of this is, but then like after all of that, for like 30 minutes, I'm like, I think you need to sit and be with yourself for a moment, right? Right? But it's like, okay, this is not how I'm going to spend the rest of my day. It is like my brain, my ego, all that kind of stuff. If I let it, it's going to totally run my show, right? It's going to run it for me. But I'm like, hold on. Okay, let's just back this up. Let's slow down, right? And then I can return to that. Even like before I came on here, like there was something that I saw in a document that I was working on. I was like, oh my God, that's not right. And that had implications. And I was like, oh, fuck. Right. And I was like, how am I supposed to do a podcast episode? Blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. I was like, wait, breathe, have fun, enjoy the time with Dominic. Right. And then I was like, okay, this is fine. I'll figure this out later. But I wasn't going to let it run my show, and I wasn't going to let it impact what I wanted to bring to this episode. Like what I wanted to do with you, the fun that I wanted to have, the conversation that I wanted to have doing this, right? I was like, no, that's not going to run me. Okay, I need to reset. Like really, in some ways, that's the best, because our brain's going to get thrown into it So it's like, do we have the conscious awareness of when we need to reset, when we need to return back to ourselves, to wholeness, to all of those things, because it is a regular practice. And I think, and I don't know this yet, but I think that over time, basically what I'm doing is I'm toning and training my nervous system.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's why we go in cold dips. And that's why we do Wim Hof breathing. And that's why, whenever I'm panicked, I put my tongue at the front of my teeth and breathe in and out through my nose to stimulate the vagus nerve in my brain. Like, we're just toning and working with our fight or flight mechanism, which is our ego, which is our danger signal, which is all of those things. We're basically just learning how to manage our nervous system and operate in the world. And I think if I could take all of what I said and put it into that, it's basically you're just trying to figure out how to navigate your nervous system that is poorly adapted to living in the modern world with Instagram, with, hustle culture, with all of that bullshit that tells us that we're not enough and that we're not safe. Because that's the not enough thing. It's like, I'm just not safe. And John Wineland talks about this really well, right? Where he's like, nobody else is going to make you feel fucking safe. You have to do that for yourself. A relationship, a job, success, all of that, none of it's going to make you feel safe. You have to do that for yourself.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. And I think where you're taking this, you're talking about the training that we have to do to allow ourselves to feel safe is, what are those environments that we choose to enter where we can practice that, right? Where we can practice allowing ourselves to feel safe. And you talk about a number of these mechanisms like meditation, breath work, et cetera. And these are all individual practices that I have absolutely made a foundation of my life. But, the thing that we have both unequivocally stated that most men are missing, that we absolutely need, which is a community. Mm-hmm. And, what you're doing with Tethr is you are creating this global community, this like meeting place where men can come and express what's going on in their inner world lives.
Yeah.
And, I know specifically it's kind of a home for, hey, if you have anxiety, if you have depression or any other kind of mental health thing that you want to come and get support for, and to provide support to others, which is just as important, right? To be there to, when you feel in a mentally strong place where you can support others. That's also something I've witnessed there. So maybe like this last stop on our journey of discussion today, which has been really powerful. Like, what is, if you were talking to one of our listeners right now who's like, I'm really like, I love everything that you stand for, everything that we've just talked about. Now I'm going to download the Tethr app and I'm going to go on. What am I going to experience? And what would you give me as my first steps of engaging on the platform?
Absolutely. Well, the first step that we make it easy for you, introduce yourself. Tell us why you're here. You don't have to like crack it open and lay it all out there. And you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to go balls deep right away. But at the same time, it's like, put a toe in the water. And what I think is so interesting, and like when I've guided men into deeper feeling states in a retreat setting where there is a safe container and you can take them in and take them out, one of my favorite tools is actually walking people into water, because it's like you can start to ease them in. So it's like they're having a really powerful response, and like it's like they're overwhelmed by X, right? Whatever that X is for them. So that you feel that there. Okay, like take a step into the water. Okay, now the feeling is rising, right? Okay, now it's up to your knees. Now it's up to your head. Or now it's up to your hips. Now it's up to your chest, right? But you always stop them at the chin, because I was like, I want you to know that the water is never going to go over your head. You will not drown in this. The highest that the water goes is right up to your chin. So it's going to feel really uncomfortable because your whole body is going to be subsumed in it, but your head will always be above water. That's the peak of that. And then you just walk them back out, right? And that's how I often do that with myself, is knowing that the water only ever goes up to my chin.
It's a great metaphor.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And so like introducing yourself is like, for some people, like that's water up to the chin.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's a big fucking step. But for those people that are going to introduce themselves like that, I can promise you the water only goes up to your chin, even if that feels like too much for you. So that's kind of step one. And then I would say, like, start just honestly scrolling through, right? That's kind of like water up to your knees. It can be uncomfortable for people to be witnessing what's going on, but at the same time, it's intensely comforting to know that you're no longer alone. And I think that's really the power of the platform that we've created, is that we've created a space designed with men in mind, designed with the idea that men need some help learning how to identify their emotions, right? At a very fundamental level, right? What is this? Oh, that's anger. Oh, that's sadness. Oh, that's grief, right? So we help them do that through the posting process. And then I think the most powerful thing that happens within the community is that there's this modeling that goes on, right? We begin to model positive attitudes towards openness, vulnerability, struggle. And that's the big one, is that we have characterized struggle in men as inherently unmasculine. And if we can normalize struggle and being vulnerable in the face of struggle, reaching out for help, reaching out, because like I make this sound like I did a lot of this stuff myself. Like if I didn't have people, I wouldn't be here today. If I didn't have support, guidance, like I would not be speaking with you today, 150%. And so normalizing struggle, normalizing help-seeking behavior. Again, we say that help-seeking behavior is inherently unmasculine because remember, the hero in the story overcomes those obstacles by himself. And we just conveniently forget about Yoda. It's that like serial independence. Like it's just like independence to a fucking fault. Stoic in the face of everything. And I'm not talking about stoicism, very, very different. And there's a huge feeling concept in, I think, stoicism as well. But stoic in like, I don't show it. Nothing is registering for me. I am strong. I am independent. I solve my own fucking problems. Thank you very much.
And I keep it to myself.
And I keep it to myself. And like I kill the bear with the bare hands and skin it and like put it over my head and then put my child and my wife on my shoulders and carry them 14 miles back to our home, right? Like give me a fucking break. That's not how it goes. And so going back to it, like the modeling behavior that happens within that, by being in that setting, right, in that community, what men are showing each other is that it is safe to struggle. It is okay to struggle. It is okay to be open. It is okay to be vulnerable. We can support each other. This is a safe process to engage in. And I think that's the most powerful concept. And then, you know, we can take it deeper with the group programming thing. And I think emotional fitness is a great way of characterizing this because it's like, again, when I said about your nervous system, it is mental emotional fitness. You are toning and tuning and strengthening the relationship that you have with your nervous system. You're learning that if I'm vulnerable, I don't die, right? If I admit struggle, I don't die. If I admit struggle, I get supported. There's a safety mechanism that you're starting to learn, right? It's like, oh, wait, maybe I am safe being a man that struggles, that's vulnerable, that's open. Maybe that is okay. And your brain starts to not freak the fuck out so much when you're struggling, because what happens is like when you then do struggle, it's like, oh my God, and if I do struggle, that means I'm not a man. And then what does that mean about this and that and whatever? And then it just becomes this whole spiral mechanism. But if you can start to train the brain and the nervous system to know that when you're struggling, that doesn't make you inherently an unvaluable human being, then you can be like, okay, wait, I know this one. Okay, I got to sit with myself for a little bit. I got to let myself know that I'm okay. I've got to reach out. I've got to do something about it. That's powerful. And I think that messaging that implicitly happens to both of our subconscious and to everybody that we interact with, I think that's really why the platform is so powerful.
Matt, this conversation has been complete fire. And I really, really appreciate you going as deep as you did on your own personal journey and your story, because I think it provides all the context, the relevant context for why men need to be looking deeper into their own inner worlds, the places in which we can explore, and then also finding those communities where we can where we can start to train, to normalize struggle, to develop that emotional fitness, and to realize that a lot of this bullshit that we've been told about that hero archetype is, you know, putting everything on your shoulders and just trudging through life. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage every man who's listened to this point to go and download the Tethr app, which I'm going to link in the show notes. I downloaded it. It takes 3 minutes, not even, it takes like 2 minutes to fill out, you know, the questionnaire, and then boom, you're online. And then all of a sudden you can see the feed of men who are introducing themselves, and there's always people who are commenting and supporting. So I think it's a great place for you to check out this work in action. And Matt, is there anything anywhere else that you would encourage our men to either follow you or you point them in any other direction?
Absolutely. I think follow us on social media at Tethr for Men on all social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can find us all there. You can go to our website, www.tethr.men. If you want to learn a little bit more, we have a blog there where you can get access to content that's been created by therapists, coaches, other practitioners. And I would say, like you said, right? It's just like download it. And even if you don't introduce yourself, like I highly recommend that you introduce yourself, like say hi to us, but don't be an asshole about it. No, I'm just kidding. Right? I'm just kidding. Say hi to us. But like, even if you just go on to it and just like start looking and start to realize that you're not alone in your struggle, I mean, that would mean more to me than anything. Like, even if you can just for a moment be like, holy shit, there's other guys who feel like that. I think, for me, that's a win.
I'm going to make your call to action very simple tonight, fellas. Just go and download the Tethr app. If you're an iPhone user, I made it really easy for you. You can go right to the show notes and click on the link to the App Store. If you're an Android user, I put a link to the website and you can go and download. I think you may have to take one extra step and go to the Google Play Store from there. Everything you need is in the show notes. Get on Tethr, fill out your profile, see the conversation that's happening there. And if you need to be supported, it's a place where you can go and connect with other men around the world who are there for the same reason.